Hello, everybody. Welcome to, oh, I just realized I'm showing the wrong screen here.
Thought that said Mongolia mood for a second. Like, wow, we're getting
Oh, no, I was, yes, so, okay, well, so welcome to our Predestination. You're jumping ahead on the announcements there. Mongolia mood would be a fun one, though.
What if our first international moot was Mongolia? That'd be
Yeah,
great.
well, we've already had it, but London mood, that is.
That's true. That's true.
No, we haven't. All right, we're really starting off on the wrong foot. Welcome to Predestination. We're talking about this fun film tonight, and I guess we've already moved into announcements, so we might as well just roll with it, right? Yeah. So actually, speaking of moots, we've got two of them coming up in October. We've got Middle Moot in actually an appropriate one to talk about. It's in Kansas City, Missouri, where Robert Heinlein actually lived for quite a while. And LA Moot on October 27th out in California, or La Moot, as some people have been calling it. And then, yes, we have Magnolia Moot, which is in Charlotte, North Carolina, coming up in November. So if you don't know about our moots, go check those out on our event pages. Also, we've actually started the fall semester at Signum University, but there's still time to register. If you haven't registered for any of the classes that you see here, you still can until Sunday, and it's not too late to catch up. The science fiction part 2, that's actually starts after the Heinlein one, right? Doesn't part 1 end with the moon is a harsh mistress? So you're getting into sort of the 70s and 80s and until today, or close to today with part 2. And then coming up near the end of this month, actually, I forgot to throw in here, we are going to be doing Signum University's annual fund drive is going to start on Audit Day this year, as it has in past years. There will be something happening then. I couldn't get details about precisely what. I believe that it will involve some kind of reading, but there may be other things similar to last year. So that's actually going to be on September 22nd, and then we'll be rolling into our sort of annual fund drive, which one of the first events that will happen there is we're going to have a Signum Symposia on mental health in the academy. That'll be a really interesting one. I think a lot of people may want to, check that one out. And then, of course, we're well into, but not very far into the Mythgard Academy on the Mort d'Arthur. There's, I think we've got the schedule out to week 11 now, and we're really not that far into the book itself so far, but those are on Wednesdays. You can check out the details at mythgard.org. So that's what we've got coming up here in September, October, and into November.
Just want to make sure you guys know that our next movie clubs coming up are scheduled. So on October 11th, we're going to talk about the 1935 adaptation of Rider Haggard's She. We're going to do that with two of our regular Signum faculty, Chris Swank and Corey Olson, the Tolkien professor himself. So looking forward to that. And then I think we've got Dave coming back, right, for Night of the Living Dead on November 15th. So some of our older films that we're looking at this movie club are, the next ones up on deck. So that should be a lot of fun. So I already have a comment from Devora here that, I forgot we have to introduce ourselves. Never mind.
I'm glad I'm not the one who forgot this time. Yeah, so
we're going to come back to her comment. So yeah, we'll introduce ourselves first.
So I'm Curtis Wyant. Been hosting the movie club here since it began. We're coming up close to a year. I guess just a few months away. But yeah, we actually announced it during the annual fund drive last year that we were going to be starting this. So at least coming up on the anniversary of the announcement of it. I think that's significant, maybe not. I do a weekly podcast with Kat, the other host here, Kat and Kurt's TV Review, where we talk about Buffy, Angel, Doctor Who. Right now we're talking about Jonathan Strange and Mr. Norrell as well. So lots of other good shows. So check that out if you get a chance. And I am a Signum University graduate. I got my master's last year.
I guess I'll
go next.
I'll go next since you kind of said most of my stuff anyway. So the only thing I'll add is that I sometimes blog at ravingsanity.wordpress.com. So hope to be, especially with a new season of Doctor Who coming up, I hope to be getting back into the habit of posting regularly. So, but same thing, Signum alum, and co-hosting these podcasts. Same as Curtis.
I guess I'm on the left, so I guess that means I have to go next. So I'll do that. I'm Dave Maddock. I'm glad to be back again on the Mythgard Movie Club, and super excited for my forthcoming stint on Night of the Living Dead, one of my favorite movies. So tune in for that. And yeah, also recent Signum University graduate, so I'm super psyched about that. So happy to be with you.
My name is Dominic Nardi. I'm a political scientist by training. I have sometimes written articles about politics in speculative fiction, including Tolkien, Star Wars, Star Trek. I am working on a paper about politics in Dune that will be written one day. I presented it at MythMoot, and possibly also working on something for regarding Blade Runner 2049. So if you want to follow me, you can go to my blog. It's Nardi Views. It's a WordPress blog. Or follow me on Twitter, at Nardi Views.
Very good. Yeah, so Kat, you wanted to bring up a comment already?
So yeah, the first comment we have here from Devorah just starts us off, I think, on the right foot by saying that thanking us for tying her brain in knots all day because of this movie. So
I don't know if that's a sincere thanks.
I think a lot of, yeah, there's a G thanks attached to it. So I think that's probably the best place to start, is that this is a very strange little story. And well, Curtis, you're the Heinlein scholar around these parts. So maybe you should kick us off here with some of the background and context.
Sure. Yeah, so All You Zombies is one of Heinlein's later short stories. He wrote it right at the tail end of his Juveniles, wrote it actually right before he wrote Starship Troopers, which is kind of that crossover novel that he meant to be a juvenile. They wouldn't take it as a juvenile, so he sold it to Putnam as a new sort of, I guess, still kind of in the realm of a juvenile, but they really marketed it as an adult book. So it's kind of written right in the midst there of his transition out of the juvenile phase, and where he had started writing a lot of short stories right up front. And while he did like another couple maybe after this was really kind of his last, short story. Wrote it in a day, apparently. Just kind of worked out the details and sat down. It's not a very long story, especially compared to some of his others. There are some similar themes here that he had explored previously, and which he goes on to explore again. So By His Bootstraps was written quite a bit earlier in sort of his early, short story phase there. And not quite as maybe intricate as this one, but does sort of have similar time travel loop paradox ideas. And of course, Time Enough for Love is all about Lazarus Long, which Heinlein goes into some other time travel stuff there, some of the same sexual types of themes, at least around incest and stuff. There's clones of different genders than him as well. So there's a lot of other stuff there. Dom, you were sort of commenting in our notes beforehand, like on some of those themes that we get here. Yeah, Heinlein does that in his stories. He goes down those roads, and he likes to press buttons, especially. So I mentioned his sort of Midwestern upbringing earlier. He was very much into sort of making people uncomfortable who he knew growing up, whether it's family or others. There's actually another short story that, or I think he intended actually to be a novel at some point, called The Borrowed Body, which he never finished. He just sort of has like 15 pages or so of like outline / notes / ramblings that also talks about it's more along the multiverse kind of idea of meeting yourself in a different universe or a different instance of the verse. And there's some it's got some resonance maybe even with something like Man in the High Castle, where there's some sort of like alternate World War II kind of history going on there. But he explores a lot of similar themes there. So I threw up some of the rejected titles for All You Zombies, or The World Snake was kind of the working title he had. And then as he often did, he wrote down like a dozen or so other potential titles as he was thinking through them. And then, of course, eventually just went with a quote right from the story. But the two at the top are kind of interesting, the egoist and the solipsist, because especially in his later novels and thinking through some of the multiverse stuff where he goes through like the number of the beast, which is basically his many worlds theory, where basically authors can just think of like new worlds, and there's a lot of imaginative stuff there. And at some point, I'm going to tie that into the thesis I wrote about imagination and creation and action and all of that. But the egoist and the solipsist, I think, are really interesting, because I think another title that you maybe could have called All You Zombies was the narcissist, and we can get into the idea of self-love, metaphorical and literal, in the story maybe in a bit. But yeah, this is just an idea. Just wanted to give you some ideas here. Not that it was necessarily hard to see where he was going with the story, but kind of where his head was at. And then also I threw in there, so in the in All You Zombies, and we actually see a couple of them posted in the film here, there's a list of the bylaws of time. And one of the ones that is in a draft of the World Snake, when it was still called that, it didn't make it into the other list that was in the published story. And it's a wise father who knows his own child, which is a near quote. It's slightly tweaked from The Merchant of Venice. So just threw that in there too, because of course fathers knowing their children and mothers and everyone else is kind of thematic throughout the story, obviously. So I don't know, any thoughts there? I know all of you read this kind of in preparation for the for the panel here. Had you read it before? What did you think? Did you read it before or after the movie? How did it sort of shape your understanding of it? Any thoughts there?
I read it after I watched the movie, and haven't read it before, although I definitely was familiar with the twists that were coming, just osmosis, being sort of around these stories and talking things over with Curtis on our podcast and stuff. Like, I was sort of somewhat spoiled, which I kind of wish I'd been able to come to the film just with absolutely no idea what was going to happen and the twists that were coming. So I'm curious if anybody here, is this story just so old by this point and well known that how common is that? Like, has anybody else come to the film or the short story not knowing anything about it, or are we all sort of, is it enough in the culture by this point that you sort of can see the twists coming like a mile away?
I'm happy to go next because I did read the story before watching the movie, and I had read it recently, like the day before I watched the film. I hadn't read the story before, but I can say that I did see a lot of the twists coming. I think it's just kind of permeated, just the general idea of time loops and things like this, I think has permeated culture enough that I kind of saw what he was doing with it. It didn't make it any less enjoyable for me in that sense, but I did kind of see what he was doing. So I guess I would agree with you in that sense that I do think that the ideas have kind of permeated culture.
Yeah, and just to throw out here, Arthur is saying by his bootstraps is in a bigger world. It's also a longer story. It's more novella length, and just that he liked that one better. Sure.
I read the story the day before I saw the film, and it's like a 7-page story, or it's really short. So I wouldn't claim to say that I saw the twist coming a mile away, because there really isn't a mile length of space within the story.
Like a kilometer away.
Yeah, but like I so it. Yeah, twists were seen ahead of time, and I think there were more than one. I think there were multiple twists, though, especially in the movie, because the movie has additional twists. And I saw the movie twist that was not in the story much further along than I saw the story twist, if that makes sense. I don't know if we're getting into spoilers, but the whole fizzle bomber thing was one of those twists that I pretty much said, like, minute one of the movie, that it was going to be that the outcome was going to be what happened. So, but yeah, it's I don't, it's a, I don't think like it's like when you go back to old Star Trek episodes, you just have to look at them in their time. Like, some of these old Star Trek Next Generation episodes, when they play around with the format of storytelling and start in media res, the local affiliate broadcasting the episode actually got calls from viewers angry because they thought the affiliate had aired the episode incorrectly. That they, so it's like people just weren't as savvy when it came to storytelling, especially when we're talking like 60 years ago. So yeah, I don't hold that against the story.
Yeah, well, and as I was sort of implying before, Arthur's pointing out that these stories that he wrote are the reason that we're savvy. That these ideas have permeated these sorts of time travel stories to the extent that they have. I mean, I guess there's older time travel stories dealing with alternate universes and sort of the butterfly effect and that sort of thing. But it seems to me that Heinlein kind of really went down this road of your own personal timeline and sort of what happens when you mess not like with the future of industry, but with your own personal history. So we have these stories to thank for the reason that the twists are so sort of familiar.
Yeah, and it is hard to kind of, after reading maybe or seeing movies like Looper or whatever, like to go back where they're doing the same thing, but maybe just refining it and adding other little bits here and there that we're used to, sort of looking for those. I mean, I don't want to spend tons of time on the source material necessarily. I will say that so the Spierig brothers, who wrote the script and directed the movie, started out literally by taking the story and putting it into a script format. And they're like, okay, so we did this and we have about 25 pages, which is, like maybe one act of the film. And they're like, okay, so now we need to add a bunch of stuff to it to, kind of flesh it out as a story and film. So, I mean, obviously we've all seen that the structure very much follows stuff. And then there's other things added to it, from the story. So no surprise there, given how they basically just took it, turned it into a script, and then, put stuff in and maybe shifted a few things around a little.
Well, and when you're reading this story, it feels like you could very easily just, a few tweaks to add in some stage directions, and you have like a one-act play. It's like there's not a lot of action. It's sort of, the bulk of it is two characters sitting and discussing. You put two actors on a stage, and you sort of have that ready to go. And I guess what makes it more filmic is going back and depicting, not just depicting the character describing his or her past, but like depicting that as well, and then expanding it out into what happens next, and what about this time agency, and sort of following all those implications.
Well, and it is funny because, I mean, obviously there's time travel in the story, like the characters do go back in time and forward in time and stuff, but there's probably more time travel via flashback than actual like time travel in the plot line of the story itself. I mean, I haven't measured the minutes or whatever to see if that's actually true, but yeah, a lot of what we get isn't actual time travel. It's through flashback and other sort of more common film device.
Two other.
Sorry, go ahead.
I was going to say two other quick comments about source material before we move on, because I think they'll perhaps set up future discussion. Is two things that did strike me about the source material, particularly after I watched the film. So the first being that we talked about how we kind of saw some of the twists coming. That said, I was a bit surprised by the gender themes going on in the story, and it did give the story the impression that Heinlein was doing something to an older trope. Like you would expect like the first or an early time loop story to not do both time looping, hey, and let's add this gender swapping thing too. That kind of made it fresh and relevant, also because of stuff that's going on in society at the moment. It seemed particularly relevant to a modern audience. So that's one thing. The other thing being the time period in which it was set. When I read the original story, I was like, there's no way that they're going to set it in the time period in which it was set in the original story. And then they totally did that, which I love. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, and Arthur, I agree. So bootstraps, by his bootstraps is where the phrase bootstrap paradox comes from. They called it that because of Heinlein's story. He's saying this is a refinement. Yeah, it's a refinement. It's an exploration of some difference too, right? Because in bootstraps, like Dave was saying, you don't have the same sort of gender stuff. Now, Heinlein totally goes and does plenty of gender bending things. So in various stories that he writes. So there's, I don't think that in itself. I'm trying to I don't remember in his earlier short stories if he does it. He certainly does it in his later novels. People seem to go back and forth and do all sorts of things with gender at various times. But yeah, I think here, he worked very much on idea over and asking questions over necessarily trying to prove a point or trying to make a statement. I think for him, especially given his sort of engineering background and his he enjoyed doing things like figuring out the mathematics of the parabolas that the spaceships would fly in or whatever. And so for him, probably sitting down and figuring out, okay, how could someone actually be their own parent, and how would that work? That probably for him was just half the fun of writing the story. And hey, that he was able to do it quickly, I would suspect that it was just him having fun, and who cares if he already kind of did the bootstrap thing. Let's go explore it as well. A few other things. So in the these are sort of references, real world references in the story, but also that come through into the film. I don't know if anyone has anything specific to say about these. I didn't know anything about the story of Christine Jorgensen until I had first read the story. It was the first time I had heard her name, and then went and looked her up. I don't know if any of you knew about her or any of that, story there.
Well, I want to give a hat tip to Arthur Harrow for sending the slide from the Heinlein Society, and that kind of pointed out these references for one thing.
Sure.
But yeah, on the topic of Christine Jorgensen, I had to throw this in there because there's a fantastic unintended reference. I don't think the video is posted yet for our Edward Scissorhands discussion. But when we talked about that movie, we were talking about further films in the, Tim Burton, Johnny Depp collaboration oeuvre. And the next one, the best one, in my opinion, is Ed Wood, which was about a director in the 50s who's kind of broadly considered the worst director of all time. So Ed Wood is sort of a little biopic about him making, not even B movies, like, D monster alien sci-fi movies, kind of running around LA illegally filming on this, street corners, whatever kind of time and money and resources he can, scramble together. And one of his films was called Glen or Glenda, which came out in 1953. And Ed Wood was a transvestite, heterosexual transvestite, but, enjoyed dressing up in women's clothing. And so he was inspired by the Christine Jorgensen story. And one of his most famous films is Glen or Glenda, sort of inspired by that. It's actually more based on Ed Wood's own experience, but sort of traded on the, the celebrity of the Christine Jorgensen case to kind of make some publicity for itself. So anyway, just a funny little crossover there. And it made me kind of curious or terrified what like the Ed Wood version of All You Zombies would have been. Because I feel like if he'd read it, he probably wouldn't have wanted to make a movie out of it. Like it seems right down his alley, especially like in 1959. So just wanted to point that out. And the other one I thought was a great connection was these teen exploitation films. I have seen I Was a Teenage Werewolf because I grew up watching Mystery Science Theater 3000. But just this idea of the kind of teenage exploitation movie where, Jane starts out as, kind of normally what's the male character, like the kind of violent, like hooligan with these sort of tendencies to get in fights and cause trouble and all these sorts of things. And then in those sorts of things, they're sent to speak to somebody and they get sort of experimented on, and turned into, their instincts are preyed upon and turned into a monster. So it has kind of, I thought that was like a pretty, I don't know if Curtis, if you know that for sure, if that was a reference that Heinlein ever explicitly claimed, but, for the late 50s period that it was born out of, it seems kind of, likely that that was the sort of thing that was in the air and influencing him.
Very possibly. Yeah, I don't know. I don't know that Heinlein ever saw I Was a Teenage Werewolf. I feel like he was a little more curmudgeonly than to have seen a movie that recent before he wrote the story. But that's just I don't know that for sure. That's just my take.
And yes, that is Christine Jorgensen holding the newspaper of her own article, just for reference.
One other thing that I wanted to mention, actually, so Kat, you had asked the question of, reading the story before, seeing the film or whatever. I didn't read enough reviews to do any kind of scientific survey or anything, but I did seem to notice a trend of those reviewers who don't mention and maybe didn't even realize that the story was based on, that the film was based on Heinlein's story, seem to not like the film, seem to dislike the film more than those who knew about and like were aware of Heinlein's story. So I don't know if that's because like like there were some who were just like, oh, this is a weird convoluted plot and it makes no sense and whatever. And it's like, well, okay, but do you understand why it's weird and convoluted and like what the original story is and what it's trying, like maybe it's not successful, but when you don't even mention that it's like based on a Heinlein story, it's like, did you even realize that there was another story behind it? So again, like I didn't read enough to do any kind of scientific analysis there, but it did seem that like the reviewers who were aware of Heinlein's story and at least maybe even if they hadn't read it, but were at least aware of the plot to some degree, were a little more forgiving or understanding of this story. I don't know if that's true in general, but just thought I'd throw that out there.
That might also just be a self-selection bias, and people that know about the Heinlein story are probably going to be more likely to be science fiction fans who are going to be more likely to know time travel, know the tropes. And I could see this being a confusing movie for the uninitiated, but for all of us, we've seen these tropes before.
Sure. Well, and there were definitely some critics who were like, "Oh, this has all been done before," and it's like, well, yes, it has, and it'll all be done again, right? Anyway, so on to the actual movie version. I kind of threw in here. I pulled these significant moments off of Wikipedia. I didn't do my own original research for all the dates here. So if they're wrong, blame Wikipedia, as any good scholar does. But yeah, I just kind of figured I'd throw them here in chronological order. Obviously, we don't see it in chronological order. We don't even see it in sort of real subjective order. We kind of, I mean, it's in medias res, but would there be a way to tell this story that isn't in medias res, given that it's a loop? I don't know. So anyway, all that to say that I threw it in like real world chronological order. And I don't have any agenda with this slide, just thought I'd throw it up here and see what we had to say about the plot. I know we'll get into sort of the additions, in particular around Arthur is making comments about the fizzle bomber, which he didn't particularly enjoy, but we definitely need to talk about the fizzle bomber and Mr. Robertson, who is kind of the other big addition to the story. I feel like the rest of it's just really fleshing out like maybe what is already explained kind of in the short story, where it's just sort of like, okay, this happened, then this happened, then this happened, and it's like, okay, well, let's check out the implications of that. Like, what was the time period like? What were the things that the person would have experienced, and that sort of thing. So, any just sort of comments about the plot, and we don't have to go like in order here or even in order of how it happens in the movie, but just sort of what are your thoughts? Throw it out there.
I was just thinking that I think I haven't worked this out, obviously. But I feel like you could do a version that does it. I don't think it would be as ambitious necessarily, but you could do the chronological order version of the story.
But where would you start? That's the question.
I mean, chronological in the sense of youth to, like, in terms of age. Like,
subjective chronology from birth to...
Yes, I think I could see a version that started with the baby left on a doorstep and just sort of follows Jane through her life. I don't think that would achieve, like that would probably be a lesser story, because the fun of, I think you'd still have shock value, but you'd miss that thing of then when you get to the end, going back and realizing the clues in the misdirects that were left by, the characters speaking to each other. I think some of that would be lost. So maybe it wouldn't be a better version, but I think like you could do a version that makes sense going in sort of birth order.
I think sorry, you go ahead, Dom.
Oh, no, go ahead. I actually, now that Kat's saying it, I actually see that version of the story, and one of my biggest issues with both the film and the short story is that it's awfully convenient that what are we calling him? Unmarried mother John doesn't recognize barkeep John, and in the movie they had to basically light unmarried mother's head on fire, so she had to go through pretty extensive plastic surgery to make that scene work, and it kind of works, but it's very contrived. And I kind of wonder if maybe going chronologically in the movie actually might have worked. I don't want to say better. I'm not sure if it'd be better, but it have an interesting different effect, because then you wouldn't have to worry so much about this hiding the true identity of the Ethan Hawke older John character. You could follow, if you go from 1945 up to the point where they meet in the bar. You as the viewer have seen Jane. You've seen unmarried mother. You haven't seen older John yet. You haven't seen that guy. So when he's the barkeeper, the audience would be just as unaware as unmarried mother. And so then that could be a different way of doing the twist, where where we find out much later in the movie that there's this older version of him out there. I don't know. Like, I'd have to write the script to know if it'd really be better, but it could maybe help get around that contrivance where you don't have to hide the character's physical identity quite so much.
And I feel like in that case, you would have to limit the interaction in the bar a lot more. Like, I feel the reason I think they have to have them as different actors is because so much time is spent with them in conversation. Like you said, it would give away the game to have them obviously be the same person. You know that in the first 2 minutes. So would you like lose that bar scene entirely, or make it into a very short version, or kind of have the barkeep kind of hidden more in the shadows and just try not to show him too much? Like, you'd have to kind of rework, which is this, obviously that's the center of the short story. I'm sure that's why they wanted to keep that, is that sort of the main set piece.
Well, if you were to tell the story chronologically, so starting in 1945 up to 1970, that would probably be a good chunk of the movie right there. And I'm kind of thinking out loud here, but I actually think you could have unmarried mother John meet older John in the bar and have it be the same actor, maybe wearing older prosthetics, and that could have been part of the reveal. Because the audience has not met older John in the story before. So when he walks into the bar and sees another version of himself, it's like, oh wait, wow, what's going on? And that would require a much more adaptation of the short story. Obviously, there would have to be some sort of recognition there, but I don't know that because I don't know that might be sac heresy, to Heinlein purists, but I guess I could see that version working.
But remember, so if you're going chronologically from birth, then the first time that they meet is when Jane is a student, right? And she meets the unmarried mother. So you'd have to deal with that reveal too.
I mean, I would keep old John in the shadows somewhere at that point. Like in the movie,
but they go on dates and have sex. Like, I mean, that's a much hard, like, for that sort of intimate setting. Like, you're not seeing them the whole time. Like, maybe you can hide it from the audience, but you couldn't both hide it from the audience and reasonably hide it from the person without some sort of structural change.
The movie does it though. You just see this guy in a trench coat, like with Jane, and
they're in a diner sitting across from each other in a clean, well-lighted place.
Yeah, like you don't have to actually show Jane with the guy. You just have to. There could be like a brief cutaway, and next thing you know, Jane's pregnant and the guy's left. I don't know. I'm not saying that this is the way the movie should have been done. I'm just saying, like, when Kat said that, I started envisioning a possible alternative way of doing it.
Well, and I mean, again, for better or for worse, you lose the voiceover probably um, in this sort of alternate version. And I don't know. I mean, the sort of cliche. I guess here's a question: like, I hear it said as a truth that voiceover is generally to be avoided. Can be sort of clunky, but here we have like
David
whoever
Lynch's
said it, like it's a large part of the movie, and we get more flashbacks even than we do actual time travel, and the story is told largely in voiceover. Like we're getting visualization, but she's sort of jumping over from scene to scene and kind of filling in the gaps. Did that feel clunky to anybody? Like, is there, is that kind of trying to hold on too much to fidelity of the narration of the short story? Again, that's the kind of thing that makes it feel more theatrical to me than filmic. Is its characters kind of telling you the story rather than just showing it to you. And I guess the chronological version, if we want to call it that, would be more the experience going through life in order that it's experienced rather than a story told from one to the other. So yeah, again, I don't know if it's certainly not better, but it might be a different way of doing things.
I feel like you guys are waiting for me to say something. I think a lot of the unusual quality of this story comes from the fact that the looping, the paradox stuff comes at the quote unquote beginning of Jane's life rather than at the end. And I think this makes it a lot more difficult for humans to wrap their minds around because we perceive time always going in a particular direction, obviously from early to late, right? That's the only way we perceive time. And I kind of feel that Jane / John, whatever you want to call this person, kind of lives life backwards. I think her life makes more sense like if you start at the death and travel backwards in her timeline rather than try to force looking at it forward. Looking at it, forcing yourself to go forward, although that it's more intuitively natural for our brains, I think that actually doesn't make a lot of sense for her timeline. I think time stories that work in the opposite way. Like I'm thinking of something like I'm blanking now, but there's plenty of time stories I'm sure where someone goes to the future and then their future person comes back and like kills them or something, and then the whole timeline changes, right? It changes the future and that kind of thing, like a Back to the Future kind of scenario. Because the loop is like there's an origin to the character and then like a quote unquote death in some capacity, right? Like the death of that timeline is just kind of, that timeline is pruned off and then the universe goes on its way. Whereas the timeline for this character doesn't act like that. There's no origin, there's only an ending in the death, if that makes sense. You know what I'm trying to get at?
Well, first of all, we're not seeing the story from Jane's death. Well, or how are you defining Jane's death? Because we don't know how long the fizzle bomber is going, right? Like we know some of the things that the fizzle bomber does. And I took these both from some of the shots that we get of the board, like your typical FBI manhunt shot of like all the stories up there, but then also some of the ones that, he mentions himself of, here's how many lives I saved, by killing these other people or whatever. But there might be a lot more than just 6 things that he's been going around doing for a time. So that's why is this truly like the middle of Jane / John's life? Like how many more years after shooting the fizzle bomber does John act as the fizzle bomber? We don't know. I mean, there's a significant physical change, in appearance, hair and teeth and, various things that go wrong have apparently disfigured him in some ways. So, yeah, just curious what you're defining as Jane's death and like where we're starting from.
Right. When I speak of Jane's death, I speak of maybe it's more accurate in the context of the film to say the fizzle bomber's death. There's literally like you got to be careful not to mix what the time is relative to. So like when I say fizzle bomber's death, I mean like literally that the oldest instantiation, like literally the character who looks oldest, when that character dies, I would
March
consider that like,
1975.
yes, thank you. So like there might be like the oldest person relative to Jane / John / Fizzle Bomber's own experience, right? Their experience of the oldest incarnation of that entity, when that person is killed, is what I consider the death, not like whatever he might have done out in the future, in the future relative to us as an audience,
Sure.
right?
Sure. Right. Well, we know he goes to like the 1990s or whatever. Yeah.
Sure.
I think that's the latest date, unless there's some like clipping that has a later one that I missed or whatever. That's the latest date mentioned, I believe.
Which, by the way, just to go back to the original source material, am I correct in my recollection that there's no death, right? Like the latest date in the original story,
right.
He's still alive, so we don't actually know.
Right.
And
he mentioned something about 1992, is it? I can't remember.
Yeah, something like that.
Yeah.
Mm.
All right, so we're getting some comments. So we've been getting comments. So first of all, Deborah pointed out I had a mistake here. This should, in January 1964, should actually be January 1965. It took some months for the like multiple surgeries and recovery period, apparently for the surgeries, at least based on Wikipedia. So I did get that wrong there. Let's see here. Arthur reiterating his hate for the fizzle bomber. We'll get to the fizzle bomber. Don't worry. Yeah. Deborah, I'm wondering how come after Jane has her sex change, she doesn't realize that she looks exactly like her baby daddy, even right down to the scars. Time, trauma, other things on her mind. I don't know. Like it's. Yeah, I mean,
that's one of those.
The scars, like I don't know, or was that in the dark maybe, and she didn't actually see the scars? That's maybe. Dom's theory. Everything they just courted in the dark the entire time.
This isn't the most satisfying, but like I feel like again, it's that very theatrical Shakespearean idea of like you put a hat on and it's a boy, like it's just, or Eowyn wears a mask and we don't realize that it's Eowyn on the battlefield rather than a man. And so I think that's one of those, to me, acceptable kind of literary tropes of I don't know what sort of label to give that, but I don't know. Like I think it's one of those things that it's not. I don't think it's meant to be taken. Not that it's not meant taken like seriously or literally or something, but I don't know. Like there's a precedent for that in stories of the kind of mistaken identity, especially in terms of gender swaps and that sort of thing.
Yeah, I don't know. For me, it was one of those contrived moments where I felt like it's a bit too contrived, and part of it is that. So, in my understanding of the story, this is meeting this gentleman, the unmarried mother, is a big moment for Jane. I mean, she hasn't been that sexually active. It's not like she's sleeping with a different guy each night. And decades later, she's recounting this to a barkeep as the moment of her life, the turning point for her life. So the fact that she doesn't remember or what he looks like, especially because we're only talking about a year or so from the time they must have slept together to the time when she has this gender reassignment surgery did strike me as a bit maybe too convenient. I wonder if the story had been changed to, where she was more sexually active or had multiple partners or this or that, and she didn't know who the father of the child was, then maybe that would have slipped by a bit more. But I don't know.
Yeah, I mean, I agree that the timeline is a little close because I feel like in terms of looking for like a realism sort of answer, I would imagine that the easiest thing is that there's a period of time, it takes John a long time to fully transition, that it's not even a matter of, going through the surgeries, that this is, I mean, I think we're given the impression that it happens over the course of a year or two, but I could see him changing so much in, the course of 10 or 15 years that by the time he sort of gets to where he is in the bar, he is somewhat unrecognizable to himself and wouldn't necessarily recognize himself as that person from 15 years ago. Whereas if like he looks like that right away, then, and it's like 6 months after they slept together, then yeah, you'd have to say, hey, like I look a little bit familiar now. But I could see 15 years later, the details being a little bit hazy and he's lost track of exactly what he looks like and what those old people used to look like and everything.
Yeah, I mean, so again, with the scars, like I still think, there you could still chalk that up to, having sex in the dark. Maybe they never saw each other naked in the light, especially if John is being careful to not reveal the scars. Also, once Jane goes through the surgery and we see him looking in mirrors, John, after the surgery, looking in mirrors, but the focus isn't on the face, right? Like it's on the scars and other features newly acquired. So maybe it's just a matter of maybe John never really looks at his own face in the mirror much. I don't know.
He should have worn one of those glasses with the nose and the mustache to hide his own face.
You've cracked it, I think.
Yeah.
Well, Devorah named the other obvious reference of Superman. Like again, I feel like this is a trope. And it's one of those tropes that it's much harder to get away with in a visual medium. Like whether or not that's fair, I think when you see something, you expect a certain amount of, I don't know, verisimilitude to it in a way that I don't know that this is like fair to hold that on the film when the story gets away with it, but you just sort of accept it when you're reading something. Whereas when you see actors on the screen, I don't know, that's when you start going, it doesn't make a lot of sense.
Yeah, but I guess also it's not like when you see somebody in the dark and you meet a stranger, it's not like you expect that they're going to be your future self. So, it's and
really true.
My understanding, time travel was invented in 1980 something in this story. Yeah, so it's not like Jane would have been primed to think about time travelers from the future possibly coming back and impregnating their past selves. So, yeah, maybe she wasn't crazy to, maybe it wasn't crazy to think that this was, that this was what was going on.
So one of the other sort of plot elements that Arthur's pointing at, without getting into the fizzle bomber, is that in the story, there's a sense of John going on after this loop has been closed, and then there's a continuation of John's story. Whereas here, obviously, like the loop is truly closed. Like it's just a continuous thing. And yeah, I mean, I hadn't really thought of it that way. Arthur said I said the F word. I'm like, wait a minute, no, I didn't, did I? Fizzle bomber. Yes. I was like, oh shoot, did I? I hope not. But yeah, I don't know. How do you see? I have to admit, I actually like that change. So I mean, maybe Arthur and I will have to have words next time we're in the same vicinity. But the it does change the feeling of the story. The feeling of Heinlein short story, I feel like is actually kind of hopeful that like, okay, he's done all these things. I mean, maybe there's a little bit of wistfulness and not sure what to do with oneself at that point. But I feel like it's like you're at the end of a long career and you've had a pretty good career that the unmarried the unmarried mother meeting John is a good move. Like it's a good thing. It's an upward swing in that, you know, he'll go on to have a successful career in the time agency and then retire as like a sort of successful, you know, person. And maybe they won't know what to do with himself after that, but you know, that's a different thing. Here it's obviously very tragic, and you know, ends up shooting himself to become the thing that he most doesn't want to become. So, any thoughts on that aspect of the change, which incorporates the fizzle bomber, but I think is a different. I think we can talk about it distinctly from the character itself.
Setting aside the practical requirement to have something to extend the length of the story to make a feature film, setting that aside for a moment, I do think that there's enough hints in the story or text that one could interpret as hints that perhaps this guy is not altogether there, which granted it, you know, implying the fizzle bomber is a bit much from the source material, but nevertheless, like, for example, what do you guys think the title of the short story means? The idea of John seeing everybody else as zombies and not himself, that's in the original source material. What significance do you think that has if you don't think that has some expression in what the feature film did with the fizzle bomber? I'm interested to hear what the panel and the audience thinks about that.
Well, and I would go right back. Sorry, I'm going to co-opt this. I'm going to go right back to those rejected titles of the solipsist. Is this all in his mind in the story? In the movie, I think it's not. I think we get enough external influence through the other plot device that's added of Mr. Robertson that I think we can attribute that. But I almost wonder if you could do a reading, and I'm not saying you have to read it this way. There are other possible readings. I wonder if there's a reading of All You Zombies of it's, you know, like a yellow wallpaper kind of story.
I was also thinking of that title, but not quite for the same reason. Hadn't occurred to me that this is just sort of potentially all a delusion, but I think just in that general, the kind of narcissism theme, that's how I take the title. You know, that, and there are shades of kind of solipsists and psychopaths and sociopaths where they don't see other people as real, you know, as fully human. And I think if this isn't in their mind, if this is, even if this is genuinely happening in reality, of course they would be that sort of person, and maybe doubt the external reality outside of their own experience. That seems kind of perfectly natural given this life story. So I agree that the film ending is different, but I don't necessarily agree that it's more hopeful or that the story is more hopeful. Because I was just kind of looking at the ending here where, you know, he says, I crawled into bed and whistled out the light. You aren't really there at all. There isn't anybody but me, Jane, here alone in the dark. Like, that doesn't sound like a happy ending to me. That sounds like, I don't know, somewhat despairing and kind of trapped within his own experience and his own psyche, and without any, you know, time traveling adventures still to go on. It's sort of somewhat bleak, I think.
Yeah.
I took it as
Sorry, just to say, like, I agree that you can read it that way. I guess what I meant by more hopeful is that, like, there's more life, and, like,
Sure.
at least maybe he could figure out, like, how to retire, right? Because that's like a common retirement thing, right? Of, like, I've been doing this job for however long, and, or, you know, at least some kind of job for however long, and now what do I do with myself? Like, I feel like that's a fairly common, you know, thing that is. So, like, you know, maybe in a few days he gets over his thing. He's like, no, actually having time to do things for myself is cool, and I'll go plant a garden or something. That's all I meant by hopeful, is that, like, there's at least opportunity to go do stuff. But yeah, I mean, I see what you're saying. Like, there's a certain amount of despair there, especially if he really enjoyed his job. But at least he didn't shoot himself and end his own life.
Right.
That's all I meant by more hopeful.
Yeah, there certainly is opportunity for more. I guess given the story, or at least the short story version of the character, I doubt his ability to take that opportunity and go and do something with whatever time he has left.
A lot of room for interpretation and to add other stuff, as the Spierigs did.
I saw it as maybe it's because I saw a one of those inspirational quotes on somebody's LinkedIn page or Twitter page earlier today. It's something along the lines of very few people actually live. Most of us are just most of us are just here for the ride. And it was one of those, you know, go out and do something big and spectacular type of inspirational quotes. But I thought it connected to this as well, and that if you look at what John Jane, unmarried mother, has done with her life, there's a lot packed in there, and there's a lot packed in just dealing with how she interacted with him herself, made love to him herself, gave birth to him herself, recruited him herself for a top secret temporal protection agency. There's a lot of life packed in there, and I could imagine just having a life so focused on yourself, where your lover is yourself, your mother and your father is yourself. Like, it you start to view everybody else as zombies. That, you know, like, you know, oh, you know, this person didn't control their destiny. Like, John Jane is literally controlling his destiny. He's controlling when he's born, what he does with his life. Most people don't have that sort of control over their lives. And I could imagine somebody saying, you know, reaching that point of ego and saying, you know, I'm master of my destiny. All these people walking around like normals who have mothers and fathers they didn't know before they were born. Like, you know, they're just zombies. You know, they're you know, they're walking through life without a sense of control, without striving on top of the world.
But at the same time, then we're into that kind of predestination paradox of the title, because he doesn't have any control. You know, everything is told to him by either manipulated or mapped out by some older version. So, I mean, I could certainly see the character thinking that way, thinking of themselves as kind of God among all these mortals who don't realize that they haven't taken control of their lives. But I guess I'm doubtful as to whether there's a lot of choice here at all. Which is, I guess, that's another thing that the Fizzle Bomber ending sort of introduces, is at least an opportunity to deviate from the prescribed plan. Whereas in the short story, there isn't really ever that moment of indecision that I can think of where John or whoever is seriously tempted to not do the thing he's supposed to do. Right?
So Arthur, I
Am I
don't.
wrong?
Sure, that's a way you could look at it. Arthur saying the happy ending in the story, in the short story, is that the narrator ensures his past happens correctly and can move forward. He says he didn't take it bleak so much as putting the past behind him. Yeah, it's,
I don't know. Like,
move forward to what?
yeah, it doesn't seem to me that the character at the end of the short story has a mindset of moving forward. He has a mindset of looking at everybody else as zombies. Like, that doesn't seem to be a recipe for moving forward, or like he's entirely, his worldview is entirely based on his own perception of himself, and he hasn't attempted to look beyond. I mean, there is a hope, a very tiny one, as Curtis tried to explain earlier, of at least he's not dead. So there's this, it leaves it a little bit open of maybe he'll come to his senses at some point in the indeterminate future we haven't seen, where there isn't any of that in the movie. But yeah, I struggle to see this character at the end of the short story as anybody but as anyone other than someone who is still looking entirely inward at himself.
well, yeah, that's true. Maybe he's just watching a movie he really likes over and over in his mind.
Like Stripes?
Yeah, whatever. I could quote that, or the first 2/3 of it. All right, so let's talk about the fizzle bomber though, because I feel like we're just there anyway. I mean, maybe we've already covered a lot of it. Like, what does and Arthur's pointing out that yes, it's technically suicide that John commits in killing his future self. I mean, I like the addition of the fizzle bomber. Might just be my predilection for the types of stories that I like. I do think it's interesting to have the fizzle bomber and avoid the temptation of having. I guess he's still the barkeep at that point, although he's like time cop barkeep by the time he gets there. Having Agent John shoot the fizzle bomber, where I feel like so much of today's stories would be let's figure out a way where he can still have our time loop paradox and move on from it too, and I think resisting that sort of impulse is interesting. The knowledge that this is the temptation that Luke almost gives into but doesn't, right? Strike me down and you'll become more powerful and all that. Ethan Hawke totally just boom, yeah, you're dead. Even if this is going to change me into something that I can't fathom being, this, I'm going to go ahead and do it anyway. Even knowing fully well as a time agent, and he should totally know that this is something he can't actually change once he finds out who the fizzle bomber actually is. So I don't know. Any just general thoughts about fizzle bomber and the character and the addition and what does it do? What does it not do? What new problems does it introduce, etc.?
I feel torn on this, and I mentioned before that the fizzle bomber twist I figured out within minutes of the movie opening, and that might be because I've seen Looper, which is another one of these kill baby Hitler ethical time travel stories, and I like those stories in theory. I find that, and there's a really rich ethical dilemma there. I mean, do you commit acts of terrorism to prevent a greater evil. I just find the stories often skirt those interesting ethical questions. And in this movie, there's like a 1 minute coda where he's flipping through the books trying to prove that he committed these acts of terrorism for the greater good. And it's like, yeah, and if you're gonna have a concept that rich, make it central to the story. It shouldn't just be like something you tack on at the ending. So that's, I kind of, if they're gonna go with it, really integrate it into the story. Otherwise, it feels a bit tacked on.
Well, I kind of feel like the introduction of the fizzle bomber gave the character more of a realistic reason to go back in time, like, because there were moments, though they didn't focus on it in the film, there were moments where it indicated that Agent John was going back to to prevent the fizzle bomber doing his thing, right? It wasn't a huge focus of the film, but it was there, and it at least gave him some other reason to go back in time other than to make out with himself, which I thought added some kind of depth to the character and gave him a little bit more motivation, that was at least externally from the audience perspective a little bit more ethical or positive in some fashion. I don't know, was I the only one who picked up on that, who felt that way?
Yeah, well, I think it provides like a concrete example of the kind of thing he does in his job. Like what we're seeing here is the end of his duties, right? Like this is him closing the loop and kind of starting himself off on his time agent journey. But I guess in the story we don't really get to see what's a day in the life of an agent of whatever, I can't remember the name of the agency. Whereas this kind of provides like this is the sort of crime and evil that they would fight. And I think it's probably a good choice and in keeping with kind of the spirit of the story that I feel like you could have done the version where the fizzle bomber plot was extraneous, where it was simply just a way to show what his work is like. And at least they kind of find a way to bring it under the umbrella of it's all the same person. Even if inevitably that twist is the most or the least sort of surprising. Like it's kind of funny to me that the one that Dom said he spotted in the first minute was the one that doesn't generate from Heinlein. I think that speaks to Heinlein's kind of creativity and surprisingness as the writer here. So yeah, does it quite meet the level of weirdness of the rest of the story? Like, no, but at least they didn't leave it outside the kind of main strangeness of the story itself. That they make a good show of not literally every person in the film is the same character, but most of them are. And I feel like they could have just not bothered with that. And then I think it would have felt more tacked on than it does. I also think it's kind of the focus of those other the other time travel stories we've brought up, like Looper, and Curtis also mentioned 12 Monkeys the other day as well, which all feel like they're kind of done in the wake of By His Bootstraps and All You Zombies. Like if they're not literal adaptations of that story, they're sort of continuations of the theme or responses to it or whatever. Even though some of them came before this movie, it's funny that they feel like they have, to me, more in common with the kind of fizzle bomber plot and the ending and kind of the paradox of the death of like what happens what are the implications of killing myself at an earlier stage in my career and all that kind of thing. Whereas I think what's unique about both this film and the story that it's based on is more what Dave was saying of the birth origin. It's the beginning. It's the kind of gender bending origin story is not the thing that people have emulated in the years since, which, like, you know, that is what it is. But like, I think in a way, even in the first version of this story, he kind of pushed the envelope a little too far. And like, I can't really think of any other, lots of stories have been written about time travelers having to kill themselves, but not a lot of time travel stories about, you know, time travelers birthing themselves. So it's kind of funny the way the influence has been, even though that's the part of the plot that is in the short story, and the Fizzle Bomber plot wasn't in there at all. So it's a little bit surprising.
I guess that's what I was saying before. Like the Fizzle Bomber plot feels just a bit more like generic Hollywood, whereas the core of the story is actually something more unique and interesting. And you know, not that I you know, hated the Fizzle Bomber plot. Like I thought there was something there, but it seems like it's somewhat separate from what the story is really about.
Well, it also gives them the solution. I know you weren't a huge fan of it, Dom, but it did give the feature film a solution to why didn't Jane recognize that she was herself, you know, in that period, because it gave them a way to change the facial features of the character.
And I mean, just like we don't know how long subjectively the Agent John or retired Agent John, you know, acts as the Fizzle Bomber. We don't actually know how long the newly recruited, recently unmarried Mother John. I'm not sure how many ways I need to qualify these. We know. So there's mention of, you know, the 22-year jump into the future, and it takes him some time to like recover and get used to that. But then there's some period of time between that and getting burned, you know, with the sort of botch. Like, I guess, I mean, like mostly containing the blast, but like still, you know, blows back on him. We don't know how much time passes in between there too. Like, subjectively speaking, you know, could be decades, you know, or whatever. So yeah, just that idea too of like we don't actually know how long of these time spans are. The other thing, and I was just trying to look up the text of the story to confirm. We get a limit of boundaries to how far back they can jump, which I don't believe we get in the story. And we actually get the reference to the ring, the Ouroboros ring that the barkeep wears. That he says a fellow operative fetched from pre-Christian Crete, which seems like a long way back. So I feel like there's a lot more opportunity there for them to be going back and messing with time than here, where we have a relatively short, like 60-year, I think, or something span.
Right, 53 years or that's
something like that, where they're actually operating, which makes you wonder, like, well, what about like once the future goes beyond that point, like can those time agents go back and forth? Anyway, I don't know that, but that's another, like, it's a smaller change, but maybe potentially too, just from like the plotting of the story gives it like a smaller span in which to actually work. Not that we don't have plenty of stories out there about jumping to all different times and spaces.
Well, and it provides a reason for why he becomes the Fizzle Bomber, and that his brain is addled from jumping beyond these limits and too much, and he's sort of right. So it gives, you know, if you're going to have him turn into this, you know, quote terrorist, then, you know, and he may be narcissistic, but he's generally not a murderous person up to that point. I think you have to give some kind of reason of eventually what is it that turns him into this kind of crazed mad person.
And that's a great question. Deborah says that she thought Robertson might be the fizzle bomber, but maybe that's just because she didn't want it to be John. Yeah, who is this Robertson guy? So we get the assertion from the fizzle bomber that we're just puppets. Robert set the whole thing up. He played us for fools. He's laying out the dominoes, and now we're just watching it fall. So here's a question: Is this entire plot just a mad? Like, we get Robertson admitting that he wishes sometimes he could work outside the time core or whatever they call it. Is this whole thing something that he set up? Like, did he somehow figure out a way to start the loop? And if so, how does one start a bootstrap system?
Right, where and when?
Yeah.
I'll start by saying that the one thing I thought not the one thing, but one of the ways in which I thought the film was going to surprise me and then it didn't do what I thought it was going to do was the way they have Robertson styled seemed very similar to John and the time agent at various points of the film. There's like kind of a similar mustache thing going on. There's times where they're both like in their kind of suits where they stand next to each other in the shadows and look really similar. And I was waiting for the kind of reveal that, okay, even the movie's adding characters and they're still the same character. Like even the secondary characters, even, the head of the time agency is going to end up being the same person. And obviously we don't get that reveal, but I still wonder if there's a hint there just from the way that the characters sort of dressed and portrayed in the movie. I don't know whether that struck anybody else or not.
I didn't think of it that way, no.
Okay. That's fine.
I would struggle to explain his appearance if that's the case, right? Because we've seen what the fizzle bomber looks like moments before his death. So that must mean, and he looked like Ethan Hawke, right? So whatever, So like how did he change his appearance to look like Robertson and then go back to look like even more crazy Ethan?
Yeah, and I'm not saying
it would be an interesting thing to do, but it doesn't seem to work, I don't think.
I don't think that they intended that for that to be what happened. I guess at the most, and it could just be purely coincidence or me, reading too much into it. But if there was intention there at all, I wonder if it's just to kind of mess with fans of the story or people who are familiar with the story and kind of throw you off the scent a little bit and wonder, sure, what if they're really all, and even if that's not what it ends up being, just the feeling again that the paranoia of, is everybody in this whole world going to turn out to be some version of this one person, kind of contributes to that zombies feeling that like we really only have one player here. But yeah, I mean, I don't think, I think they would have made that explicit if that's what they were actually trying to do. So then I guess that aside, the real question is, what is his role here? I mean, kind of what you're saying, if he set this wheel in motion, how could such a thing be done? Like, at what point would you break into, it's a perfect circle. There's no entry point. So is he the puppet master, or he's just another puppet of fate and can't really do anything other than what he's supposed to do, same as everybody else?
He clearly interferes at points where he knows what's going to happen later. Maybe not every point where he interferes, that's the case. Like maybe, the first time he meets Jane or whatever as part of the space agency, maybe that's like a legit first meeting. But then being part of the time agency and being a recruiter and all of that, there's also the idea that he's intervening to make sure that this time loop keeps going. So what is his vested interest? And is it, I kind of had put on the previous slide a couple of questions too that we didn't really talk about. Like, is the New York bombing ever actually really a threat? If we know that Agent John is going to kill the fizzle bomber in 1975 before the bombing happens, then is that a threat, or is that just Robertson calling it a threat? If we never get past a certain point in time, then how accurate did Robertson create those, news stories that the fizzle bomber holds up as proof that he stopped certain things? Like, his life never gets beyond that point. So how do we know that those things ever would have happened had he, not been stopped? If it's an infinite loop, we can't actually know that. So where did those news stories come from? How did the fizzle bomber get them? And all of that kind of. I mean, I think that those would be where I wonder if Robertson, with his comments about I sometimes wish I could operate outside, maybe he figured out some way to like kickstart this loop, and maybe it's totally for fizzle bomber type reasons of, by doing this, he's saving a lot more lives, even though, this bomber runs around in this 53-year period and bombs a bunch of stuff. I don't know. It's all speculative. I don't have answers to any of that.
I kind of hope we don't get answers to that, because I think the ethical dilemma is more interesting if we don't know with 100% certainty if the fizzle bomber actually prevented these atrocities. I think it's more, it's a tougher call if we think there's a chance that these things might not have happened and that these bombings weren't necessary. Like if we were to find out that there's actually a parallel timeline and the fizzle bomber actually prevented all these deaths, and it's just a more it's more of a clear-cut picture, and then I think it's harder to see the fizzle bomber as quite as crazy as I think the film makes him out to be. So I don't know. I like the ambiguity.
And here's a question, and I don't know if this was Arthur's maybe kind of alluding to this. He asks, are we saying that the fizzle bomber messes up the idea of Robertson being in the loop? What if Robertson is? What if there's two Agent Johns, and one of them is Robertson and one of them is the fizzle bomber? Like, what if Robertson's the Agent John that breaks the loop, and there's this sort of dual thing going on there?
I like the idea of the possibility of somebody breaking the loop, but we don't see it. So it doesn't happen in the film. Like
Right.
there could hypothetically, outside of what we have seen, another iteration of the story, Robertson goes and breaks the loop somehow. That would be interesting, but it doesn't happen. So what's weird is that, like, with time, I mean, we've talked about on several times where this story is unusual in that the loop is at the beginning, not at the end of the character's arc, right? And that causes so many problems. And Robertson is stuck in this issue of, like, with the question of, did the New York City bombings really happen, or were they really prevented, and things like this. If the loop was at the end of a character's arc, right? Like, you can imagine it, like there was this origin and the timelines branched out in like this multiverse of timelines, and like depending on what actions were taken by various characters, like certain timelines, were kind of pruned off, right? You can't do that when the loop is at the beginning and not at the end. Like, you could only do that if you traversed the tree backwards in time. And we don't actually see that happen. And so it's this really weird, like, it's a paradox of a paradox, because there's no way for us to answer these questions. Like, they're literally unanswerable without having some sort of like alternate dimension. Like, this, Agent John just kind of like enters our timeline through some alternate timeline that, you know, does not intersect with our universe except for in this one spot. You know what I mean? It's weird. So like any alternate timelines where he didn't save the you know, the people from a particular bombing incident or something, like that timeline only exists for Agent John. Like nobody else in the world has access to that universe except for him. He's like the one nexus where those universes cross.
Well, and there, so like, you know, with this sort of parallel universe, you know, splitting off from a decision point kind of idea. If shooting the fizzle bomber is what causes him to become the fizzle bomber, then not shooting him means there's no fizzle bomber to make that choice to begin with.
Sure.
But then the fizzle bomber. But then the fizzle bomber keeps bombing, presumably, right? Like,
well, there is no fizzle bomber because shooting the fizzle bomber is what causes him to become the fizzle bomber.
well, I thought jumping a lot through time was what caused him to go nuts, which is what causes him to become the fizzle bomber.
I thought it was
Like,
seeing
is the death
evidence.
You believe the fizzle bomber.
essential to?
Sorry.
Well, if you believe future fizzle bomber, it's seeing evidence that he's preventing atrocities. I mean, I thought that's what would persuade somebody like John to do this.
The fizzle bomber says, and I mean, we can not believe that this is true. Maybe he's just saying it, but the fizzle bomber says, if you shoot me, you'll become me. So if we,
Yeah, but he's crazy. Why would you believe him?
Yeah.
Here's a related question though.
I
real
just
quick.
said the whole. I think it's just before the quote that I have here on, you know, I made you who you are, you made me. Like that. That's the whole idea of, I think that they're trying to do with Fizzle Bomber is that, again, that by becoming as monstrous as the Fizzle Bomber, right? Like that's the first. If the whole point of the Fizzle Bomber is I'm going to kill a few people to save a lot of people, then that's the decision that presumably for the first time Agent John makes when he kills the Fizzle Bomber. And I think that's why I find it believable to say if you kill me, you become me, because you're making the same exact choice that you'll then keep making over and over and over again.
Well, that you make a good point, and I do think it plays a factor, but I don't think we can discount the information that Kat brought up, which is we're told that the more you jump and the farther you jump, the more it affects your physiology. But then this is that's exactly what I was going to ask. Is like, who tells you that, and how do we know that that's true? The only
Robertson.
way you know is to see it happen. And is that why he's the fizzle bomber, or is he the fizzle bomber because of the reasons that you give? You could interpret it in either way, and the only way we know is because of this guy Robertson, which doesn't help us at all.
Yeah, and Deborah, I don't know if we can believe the Fizzle Bomber. Like, he's crazy. It's a good response to say maybe we don't believe him, or he's like maybe he's lying. Maybe he wants to die. Maybe there's like a, you know, I'm so messed up, please just kill me now aspect to it, right? Or maybe it's hey, I know it's going to happen anyway because I already know the history, so there's a, you know, fate predestination thing going on here anyway. Yeah, and it doesn't mean that if he doesn't kill him, he won't still become the bomber. That's also potentially true. But I really like the idea that Robertson is Agent John who doesn't shoot the Fizzle Bomber. I want to think about that a little more. There was something else I was going to bring up, but I can't remember what it was now.
He just had plastic surgery again. That's how we solve the.
Well, he looks like he could be a cleaned up, like, I never got my teeth blown out and let my hair grow long.
Yeah, they're not,
you know,
and that's
older.
Like they're similar enough that I feel like we have to entertain the possibility.
You know, like we just shaved it, you know, trimmed it up real nice and Like he could be a little, an older Ethan Hawke.
Is there any, other than the fact that it would be cool if Robertson is the agent John who didn't kill the fizzle bomber, right? Let's go with that. Is there any other evidence that that might be the case beyond it just being really cool?
Does there need to be? I don't have any. That's why I want to look at it more. I don't have any other evidence to support that.
Other than the fact that he has a sweet mustache and Ethan Hawke has a sweet mustache, I mean, there's got to be something there, right?
You got to go with the sweet stash theory.
The one thing I'll say, I'm not buying into this argument, Curtis, but the one thing I'll say
it's not an argument.
is that
it's an
so far,
exploration.
You would need to have evidence for it to be an argument. Sorry, Dom.
In the short story, as I was saying before, there's the tension between time travel, which seems to suggest that these events and these actions are predetermined, and the sense that John Jane has that he is controlling everything and that he is controlling his own birth, love, death, etc. Now, the fizzle bomber kind of suggests that maybe he's not. It takes away that illusion of control, that he's not as in control as he thought he was. And even though older John does shoot the fizzle bomber, that's presumably not a choice he wanted to make. Like he didn't arrange for himself to shoot himself, if you take my meaning. But that said, if Robertson is another version of John, then that restores that sense of control, because it is now John manipulating himself to shoot himself. So I could almost see it in that, like, if this is a story about a guy who is used to controlling everything about his life through time travel, like it would tie up that loose end and show that the fizzle bomber is part of something that he also controlled through time travel.
So the consensus
So
is
you all agree with me, is what we're concluding, yeah? This wasn't a dumb idea at all, yeah. Good.
All right. Let's look at the sets, because the plot, I think we've made ourselves a little crazy, and we're not quite there yet, but maybe approaching the 2-hour mark. So I don't know how faithful we have to be to that, but anyway, yeah. So why did they bother to keep the timeline? Dave, I think you mentioned that in your kind of discussing this, your reading of the story, and that like you were surprised, and I think I was also surprised to see that it wasn't maybe more futuristic from our perspective. It's like futuristic from like a 1940s or 50s perspective. It like insofar as they even like you can see there in the top right the sort of a Jetson-esque motif to the clothing and the helmets and stuff. Yeah. So thoughts? I mean, did you like it? Did you think it worked? Did you kind of wish it, maybe they had pushed it out like 200 years in the future, or I don't know. What do you think?
I thought it was kind of a charming choice, and it set the story apart from so many other these time travel stories that are actually set in our future. It had the retro 60s, 70s space outfits were a nice touch. It's just not something we're going to see in most other movies that are set in like the 21st or the 22nd or 23rd century. That said, I wasn't crazy about the fact that they kept the Space Whores program or the Space Wenches program as the plot device to get Jane to get Jane into space, because
yeah.
Even for the 60s, I think that would have been a bit that would have been interesting in the 60s, and it certainly hasn't aged well. Not that you can't have prostitutes or sex workers in space, not to diminish sex workers, but it's like there's the suggestion that like this is the only thing that women can do in space or with the space program. And yeah, maybe you do want to confront the gender barriers that women faced back then, but I don't know if this felt like maybe not the best way to do that.
Yeah,
I mean,
I
I
can't
think
say I disagree. Sorry, Kat, but I'll make it quick. I can't say I disagree with that. But just uh, 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 I just thought it was a nice change from, like, it's obvious to make a time travel movie future-y, just at a base level. And I just thought it was a refreshing. I think you used the word charming. I would agree with that. It was just a change of pace, and there was no particular reason not to do that, right? Like you're already buying into weird time travel, so why not? Like it just made it, I think, a nice cinematic change for this kind of movie.
Well, and the sort of space travel in the '60s that we know didn't actually come. Like you're already like, it's not even just that there's like time travel. It's like that our own history has been modified. So why not just like tweak it a little more to be, yeah.
Right.
right, it's
Yeah.
already a kind of alternate universe. This isn't, not the 50s, 60s, 70s that we know and remember. Yeah,
I don't
and
remember any of that happening in the
no.
'60s.
Probably because
Um,
we were all stoned in the 70s.
No comment.
um, yeah, I mean, this is crit ficking. It's, I'm trying to read the minds of the script writers a little bit, but like I kind of feel like whether or not it worked and whether or not it's fair or accurate to the period, maybe it's even a little bit over the top for the 60s, as Dom was saying, but for better or for worse, I feel like that's what it's wanting to do, is engage with the kind of gender limitations and aspects of that period, sort of saying, okay, if we're going to set this in the period where the short story was set, then to take those kind of gendered elements out of it wouldn't service that. Like I could see that being a source of criticism of, if you keep it in the 60s but take the kind of sexist implications out of what Jane goes through, then is that not really being truthful in wanting to confront those aspects of the time period?
I just think there are smarter ways to do that than space horrors. I mean, Hidden Figures came out recently and took place before. I think it was actually I'd have to go back and look at the timeline, but it was around the same time in the late '50s, early '60s. So it was around the same time, and these were like Hidden Figures is all about racial and gender barriers in the space program. It is exactly the same issues in the same context that this movie that Jane is going through. It's just instead of space horrors, it's like something a bit more. It's a bit more of a nuanced look, and it's also, I guess, like not avoiding that uncomfortable implication that like the only thing the government could think of for a woman to do in space is sleep around.
Sure.
What about the sort of noir aspect or aesthetic to a lot of it too? I mean, I guess a lot of that goes with the Fizzle Bomber plot. Although I've seen All You Zombies described as sort of a noir science fiction story as well. Like I think it had that, and I mean, the time period in which it was written is fine for those sorts of stories too. So maybe that's already in there with it. Do you think, to get away from the 1960s, I guess maybe I'm just asking, like, what about some of the other time sets and pieces and everything, and aesthetic overall? Like, because I feel like it does sort of flip back and forth.
Mm-hmm.
Even, I mean, some of that's with the time travel, obviously, but like, even just going from the sort of like street of New York right in the beginning to like then down into the sort of dingy bar. There's still the same time period, but just a very different sort of aesthetic there. And then within the bar, going down into like the basement and stuff, which sort of prepares you for another scene change to come.
Well, that's true, and that's something I hadn't really thought of. Is if you did the kind of near future version of the story, not knowing what the near future is going to look like, you'd have to sort of imagine what 10 and 20 and 30 and 40 years in the future would look like. And I feel like it would be, when you're kind of dealing with an imaginary future time period, it would be hard to sort of make those distinct. Whereas by keeping them, yes, this is an alternate history, but it's recognizable. You see Jane's little horn-rimmed glasses there, and we know we're in, the kind of early 60s period. And, you get somewhere else and you recognize the kind of dinginess of 70s New York. And that's just a very visual, quick, you don't have to explain to anybody, what's the difference between the 2040s and the 2060s? Like,
right. Right, you can have two different visuals for those, but like it's not instinctual or recognizable that which is which.
Right.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, overall, I thought, I was going to say the blending, but it's not blending, because we talked about blending in Edward Scissorhands. It's not that kind of blending, right? Like, they're very distinct, very cut and juxtaposed, I think, settings, but like they work really well together. I don't know. I like the amount of time and effort they put into the different looks and feels. There's I don't know if anyone else has the DVD. There's a special on the making and everything, and I thought it was gonna be like a 20-minute thing. Ended up being like an hour and a half long, which made me regret starting it at 11:30 last night. But really interesting, like how they go through and because this, I mean, the other thing is that this was a shoestring budget. They got like $3 million from the Australian film government subsidy thingy, and that's the official term. And like that was their budget. So like, I mean, they're not working with a huge sort of blockbuster budget obviously here or anything, and so just the ways they sort of cut up the spaces and found some like on scene sets, like for the whatever, like the where the bomb goes off, like in this sort of industrial looking place there and whatever, but like all the rest of it is like done in like a 1 block area. And then like for the New York scene, it's like there's some digital putting in the skyscrapers in the background kind of thing, but like very interesting to see how they use all the space and everything. And like you go through one door and you're going from like his apartment into like the orphanage. I mean, I know that happens on sets all the time, but just given how little money they actually had and like what they had to do, and having like even like these little like bulbous helmet things for like their space flight simulators, rather than building like a huge like spaceship type thing that you might see in like another movie. But it totally works with the aesthetic of the show or the film. I think is really cool. So. And then there's Sarah. Pretty unanimous, I think, or I guess you can't be pretty unanimous. Either you're unanimous or not. But like by and large, I mean, Ethan Hawke is, I think, really good in this too. But like everyone, even like the critics who like hate the film, are like, but Sarah was pretty good. So I think some high praise there. Obviously, all the different sort of outfits and mannerisms, the different gender portrayals, won a lot of Australian film awards as Best Actress, specifically for her role there. The film also got a few others from some film festivals and that kind of thing, just as a whole. But yeah, I mean, I don't know that there's more to say than just that she did a really good job. But I wanted to make sure we like called out her performance. Any any particular manifestation of Jane or John that you particularly liked? I guess I would just ask that to each of you.
I'll be honest. I hate to sound like such a contrarian tonight because I actually liked this movie quite a bit, but I didn't think Sarah Snook playing the male version worked for me.
No?
It looked too much like a woman dressed up in a man's suit trying to pass off, like kind of like a reverse Tootsie or something like that. Like it, and that wouldn't have bothered me so much, but for the fact that they make it a point in the movie several times that the John version is supposed to look like a very handsome or like a I forget the term like a manly man or and women are looking at him like so it's you're not supposed to he's not supposed to be a feminine looking man yet just Sarah Snook in a suit like the suit clearly doesn't fit her very well. It's very clear that it's just not I don't know so that kind of took me out of the movie but for Sarah Snook playing the female Jane was very good I thought. And I thought she brought a lot to that role and a lot of vulnerability to the role because and it gave for me it gave the character more depth than what we got in the story and a more emotional depth more I actually felt I felt happy for her when she got that moment of love so it was a bit more of a mixed bag for me than than the critics.
Well, one thing I think kind of works well with the way they have it portrayed in the film, at least, wouldn't necessarily make you feel differently about the performance, but I think could kind of address some of that is, it's kind of interesting, and I saw like a few other people who, I was looking around and a few other people pointed this out as well, that in terms of the kind of gender bending and the transition aspects of it, that the kind of gender dysphoria doesn't begin until after the transition. Like, when now she's kind of says that when I was a little girl, I didn't fit in and there was always something different about me. It's not like she was perfectly confident and comfortable in her female skin either. But I don't mind so much if the male, unmarried mother, John, is not super convincing because this, change was not something that Jane elected to have. It was something that was sort of forced on her by surprise without her consent, and she's sort of scrambling to make it work and working on changing her appearance and her mannerisms and her voice over time. But like, I don't get the sense that John is ever fully successful with that. So like, I know there's a lot of calls these days, and perfectly reasonably, to have transgendered characters played by transgender actors, which seems fair enough. But like in this case, I think you could have gone that way, but I also think it works to have Sarah Snook do it because it's not truly a transgendered character. It's a woman who underwent this surgery sort of outside of her consent. So I don't know, the discomfort and the awkwardness and the fact that it doesn't look quite right and it's not very convincing and all that kind of thing, I feel like actually might serve the characterization in the end.
Yeah, and just to kind of build on that, because she's not transgender in sort of maybe the most common way we think of it, where you're having reassignment surgery. She's intersex, where she has both organs already, and I think you can attribute sort of the ill-fitting like suit there, because I do think that as the unmarried mother, John, the clothes fit better. Like by that point, he's figured out how to wear things, or at least the style that makes him look more manly or whatever. in the bar there, rather than when you're looking at like the first time he's putting on a suit and kind of going outside. Yeah, I totally agree. It looks uncomfortable and weird, and sort of like it's hanging off him. And I think that's intentional. I think because this isn't a Tootsie thing where it's one gender dressing up in order to try to look like another gender. It's someone who actually was a woman, and now through surgery and there's probably hormone changes going on here and stuff that aren't fully happening, which could also be another thing we could throw in there about difference in look later on in life, where maybe it takes some years for the testosterone to really kick in and start maybe having some of those features. And so just thinking about, you can see in the top left picture there, the prosthetic brow, where they really tried to make her look more like Ethan Hawke by putting that in there. Is that, like, I mean, we know it's prosthetic, but is that like within the world of the story, is that just because like, since John has become a man, like he's just constantly has this furrowed brow, and so now it's more pronounced, or is there a hormonal change going on there and that kind of thing? And I think we can just sort of like see those early attempts at wearing men's clothes as being uncomfortable, and just because of that, I don't know. I thought she worked really well in all the different roles, and I didn't see. I don't disagree that there are times where Sarah Snook portraying a man looks like a woman portraying a man, but I think that's the point of like within the story.
Except that's not what the script says. I mean, like, I think I would accept everything you both said had the script not contradicted that, because I'm looking it up online, and there's one point where the unmarried mother character says they, meaning the nurses and the women at the Horrors Academy, the Space Horrors Academy, all thought I was handsome. And then there's another point where Jane says, I think it's unmarried mother recalling her memories of Jane meeting unmarried mother in the past, saying that this was a very handsome person. So, like they're kind of, like, I guess, like, it sounds like they're saying one thing, like they're not saying that this is a person who's supposed to look like they're going through a gender change, which is in the first few scenes of the movie, that's what I thought it was. Like they're saying, the script is saying this is somebody who's supposed to look like a stereotypically handsome man who's going to turn ladies' heads, and that's where I just felt like the illusion didn't quite work for me.
See, I don't see handsome there as a synonym for masculine. I feel like in the context of the performance and all the the portrayal and everything, I'm seeing handsome more in the sense of just like attractive. And some of the does turn ladies' heads, but not necessarily because he's the manliest guy around. Like, I guess I don't necessarily see that has to be one specific type of, attractiveness. Like, you could have a more, feminine version of that, that kind of seductor guy who still gets all the ladies. So I don't see a contradiction there, I guess.
Do we know, one comment I would have on the performance is that I thought she really did a great job, and it was so nuanced that it's hard to say exactly what, but I thought she did a great job just portraying her evolution. We've talked about how the different periods of her life, she appears to be becoming more and more comfortable in a man's body, right? And I think that part of that obviously is costume and so on, but there were nuances, mannerisms, and things in her performance that I thought she did a really good job doing that in a way that a lesser actor would have seemed ridiculous. And I didn't really get that vibe from her performance, which I think was a huge point to her credit. and which made me wonder. And Kurt, this is a question for you because I know that you had watched some of the DVD extras. Do we know how they filmed it? In that, did she film her character chronologically from her perspective, from female to male, which would make it a bit easier, or did she have to flip between the different timelines, which is how we perceive it as an audience? Because God, it would be so hard to pull those different mannerisms and keep all of that straight in your mind as an actress, I would assume. All to her credit.
Sorry. My understanding of just filming a movie in general is that they film out of sorts anyway. I think a lot of the filming schedule has to do primarily with sets, especially if it's like on location stuff, which some of it was for this, as well as actors' timeframes. Like I know, for example, Ethan Hawke finished his filming like a week before the rest of the movie was filmed. Just because they actually went week by week, like week 1, week 2, week 3, and showed like different things. So I would be surprised if it was filmed in the order that we see it in the movie, because that's like never how they film movies. I would also be surprised if it was filmed in order of like young to old. I mean, also because you're dealing with other actresses, right? You know, with the child actress who portrays Jane in the orphanage, and that kind of thing too. So I can't say specifically. The one thing I do believe I remember is that so she's Sarah Snook's the one too in like the burnt face that we see there, sort of grasping for the violin case there. After the explosion. And that was late. That was like one of the last things they did, I believe. It took like forever to get that makeup on, as you might expect, and that kind of thing based on the thing. But I just don't think that's how movies are filmed in general. So I doubt that it was any kind of chronological in that sort of way. But I think that's just an aspect of filmmaking. And good actors can deal with that. I don't know that I could. I'm certain I couldn't necessarily deal with that.
But in this case,
why I'm not a professional actor.
But it's such an exceptional case as well, because I mean there are plenty of movies where actors play multiple roles, right? But multiple roles that are so close in mannerisms and everything else, like and that you want to have a continuity of character development where this woman is transitioning into a man like over time and have that consistent. Like I thought to pull that off as well as she did, I think is an impressive.
Oh, I totally agree. And I mean, and they have continuity experts and people there to be like, okay, remember this is right after such and such happens, or you're feeling this in this moment, and whatever. I mean, I've never been a film actor, so but my understanding is that those sorts of things are if you have a good director and a good coach and you're talking over stuff for the 3 hours while you're in makeup getting your prosthetics put on, you're talking through like, okay, what am I feeling, how am I doing? And I'm sure, I mean, for any actor worth their salt, like they must have a process to get into that. Maybe more than I would have, but less than like Daniel Day-Lewis, method acting the enther time. Which it would be hard to method act this, right? Like you could, like, which character are you the methoding at? I don't know what the right verb is there, but anyway.
I'll also say I did not know Sarah Snook at all before recently, although I was aware of her just before seeing this film because she is in a show that just premiered this summer on HBO called Succession, which was excellent. And so, and that it's gotten a lot, a lot of acclaim, and her performance in particular has been singled out. And she's great in it. So yeah, like when I saw that she was in this movie and we were going to watch it, it was like, oh, I actually know her and never heard of her before. So if anybody wants to go check that out, it's on HBO.
Yeah, and so just this year, actually, the Spierig brothers came out with another movie, Winchester, which apparently is terrible, but stars Sarah Snook alongside Helen Mirren. So I don't know if it's worth going to see. Everything I've read about it is that it's really not good. Going the other way, actually, Ethan Hawke starred in a film prior to this that the Spierigs did called Daybreakers, which actually has gotten pretty good reviews, and it's like a vampire film. And sort of the irony is that the Spierigs started their filmmaking career with these sort of short horror zombie films. So of course they would do a story based on All You Zombies, which actually doesn't have any zombies in it. But anyway, just to kind of fill out some of their interconnectedness with all of that. But yeah, I thought she did great in this. I thought all the roles were really good. Again, I don't necessarily disagree with Dom that like there were times when you could tell Sarah Snook was a woman trying to play a man, but I feel like that's consistent with the story, so I was okay with it for the most part.
Yeah.
But
well, in my defense, and Kat probably knows this from some of my comments on Twitter about actors cast in other movies. I tend to be very picky about, I guess, I if I recognize an actor's face, it takes me out of the movie and makes it harder for me to believe in the character. So if I see features on the unmarried mother's face that don't quite look, the way that I would expect them to with the character, that's something that just I'm very sensitive to that. So
right, your mileage will vary with performances just in general across the board, but this one is a particularly high level of difficulty. So
yeah, Arthur is also saying that Sarah Snook was in the movie Steve Jobs, and she's in a Black Mirror episode.
Oh,
which I did not
remember.
But cool. All right, we're kind of past our sort of de facto 2-hour time limit. I don't know. We didn't get to the incest, loving yourself.
The incest slide.
Do we need to talk through the tropes that we see? We've got like 3 here from Doctor Who alone, and then a couple others, one from Buffy and one from Star Trek, and then of course the Predestination one on the top left.
I guess just to point out, like the discussion that we were having when we were kind of throwing out examples and put the slide together, is the decision that all these different stories make. It seems to be a very much a black or white kind of choice. You either kind of assume that if you meet a prior version of yourself, you will hate that person because they're you and everything they do annoys you. Or, the other option is that it becomes this kind of self-love, narcissistic kind of auto-incest situation. And so it's just, that's an interesting dichotomy to me, that like instinctively writers tend to go one direction or the other. There doesn't seem to be a lot of in between there.
Where you're just like drinking buddies with your old self.
Right.
Yeah.
And that's it.
And that to me was actually one of the more interesting parts of the whole story. Is this time travel, the idea that you could go back to your younger self and change that person's life. And I don't want to say necessarily for the better, but I think in a lot of these cases, the way that time travel is used helped one version of the self put past events into context and give them greater meaning. And like Jane meeting the older guy was in a lot of ways a good thing. It gave her a lot of confidence. And then the baby came along, destroyed her life. But then unmarried mother meeting barkeeper John put that event into context, and you started to see it as part of a larger plan. And so it was just kind of it was an interesting, I guess I didn't aside from the auto incest, it wasn't quite as black and white a situation as I guess some of these other situations might be. But it did, in each case, each interaction between the past and present selves, it did add greater meaning. It gives a person's life greater meaning, which is always interesting.
Yeah, and Devore points out that, as much as I said, there is this either or choice, the movie and the story actually do both. Kind of explores both Jane and John's hooking up, but also, I mean, the film even more so explicitly with the kind of self-hatred aspect. It kind of starts with the whole, if I put the person you hate in front of you and you could kill him, would you? That's the sort of opening question that the movie starts with. So that's kind of the central theme of that self-loathing. And so it actually does it doesn't have them be drinking buddies, but it splits the difference in that it includes both of those options.
And that's our last slide. So, yeah, I had some quotes here from, a few reviewers and stuff. I think we've talked about most of this, though. Generally, a lot of people like this film. As with most films, it has its detractors, but seemed to go over pretty well. I will stand by statements I have made before that I think it's the best Heinlein adaptation. There haven't been many. Starship Troopers is sort of the one everyone knows. There was also an adaptation of The Puppet Masters, and there have been a lot of Puppet Master ripoffs. But yeah, I think this certainly came off better than both of those. So good stuff.
So there's a lot of opportunities for future IP.
There are. I mean, I still have dreams about Tim Minear's script for The Moon as a Harsh Mistress. Dr. Sturgis once told me that she actually got to talk to Tim Minear about his script for The Moon as a Harsh Mistress, and I wish I had been a fly on that wall. But alas, it seems that will never come to pass. But we've gotten various things. I think there's talk of Stranger in a Strange Land television series at some point. I want to say there was something else that maybe it was Moon actually that also there was talk of doing. But it's like until we get it. I'm not going to hold my breath. Arthur Says Glory Road would be a good movie. That's Heinlein's sort of science fiction premise for a fantasy story. So maybe that one would actually get some votes in the Mythgard Academy Council of the Wise. But yeah.
Someone has to nominate it first.
Yeah. Well, I mean, Heinlein has been nominated before. Certainly, I know this for a fact. But anyway, all that to say that there's plenty of opportunity. We keep hearing that maybe something will come along someday, but until then, at least we have one good adaptation on film. And I actually do like Starship Troopers, the movie, but not because it's a Heinlein story. It's completely something else other than the Heinlein story. But I was a male of a certain age when it came out, and so I'm sort of predisposed to liking it. Other than that, yeah, we'll see what we get in the future. Next time, so our next movie is She. We're going way back, further back in time than we've ever gone before. As Kat mentioned at the top of our discussion, we'll have Corey Olsen and Chris Swank joining us, and that'll be in the midst of the annual fund campaign. So come. My understanding, and I don't know if this holds true for Movie Club, but we can certainly try to make it, is that as they did last year, there will be drawings for attendees. And since we don't get a lot of attendees at this fine program quite yet, maybe that means we'll get a little better crowd than usual. So yeah, come see us talk about She and join in, and I'm sure we'll have some Inklings inspired conversation for that as well. Cool. Thank you.
Thank
See you
you.
then.
Been a pleasure, guys.
Thanks, guys.
Thanks. Have a good night, everyone.
You too. Bye.